On my birthday, my daughter-in-law tried to humiliate me. If it's up to me, you'll die alone, abandoned, without your son. I took a deep breath and warned, you have 10 minutes to vanish. 8 minutes later, she was crying, begging for forgiveness. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that day changed everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Barbara, and I'm 66 years old. 6 months ago, I lost my husband William after 42 years of marriage. We were high school sweethearts who built a beautiful life together, raised our son Christopher, and thought we'd grow old watching grandchildren play in our backyard. Cancer had other plans. The grief was overwhelming. Some days I could barely get out of bed. The house felt too quiet, too empty, too full of memories that now felt like ghosts haunting every corner. William's coffee mug still sat in the same spot on the kitchen counter. His reading glasses were still folded on his nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to move them. Christopher, my 35-year-old son, had always been thoughtful. After the funeral, he started visiting more often, bringing groceries, checking on me, making sure I was eating.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
It was during one of these visits that he brought Jessica, his girlfriend of 8 months. She was 29, blonde, with perfectly straight teeth and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Mom, Jessica has some ideas about how to help you through this difficult time, Christopher said that first day, his arm around her waist. Jessica stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Barbara, honey, we're so worried about you. Christopher tells me you've been isolating yourself. That's not healthy for someone your age, someone my age. The phrase stuck in my throat like a fishbone. Within 3 months, they were engaged. Within 4, they were married in a small ceremony that Jessica insisted should be intimate and healing rather than celebratory, given my recent loss. I should have paid more attention to how quickly everything moved, but grief has a way of making you miss important details. Jessica moved into Christopher's apartment, but she had opinions about everything in my life. She thought I should join a grief support group. She suggested I might benefit from antidepressants. She found brochures for senior living communities and left them on my kitchen table during visits. It's just that this big house is so much for one person, she'd say, running her finger along furniture for dust. And the neighborhood is changing. Wouldn't you feel safer somewhere with other people your age? Christopher would nod along, his eyes filled with genuine concern. Mom, maybe Jessica has a point. You seem so lonely here. Lonely. Another word that felt like a slap. 3 weeks ago, Jessica announced she wanted to throw me a birthday party. It's time to celebrate life again, Barbara. William would want you to be happy. I didn't want a party. I told them this, but Jessica insisted, saying she'd already invited people and made arrangements. Trust me, she said with that smile that never reached her eyes. This is exactly what you need. The morning of my 66th birthday, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. The date itself felt wrong without William there to bring me coffee in bed and sing happy birthday off-key like he had for the past 4 decades. I chose a simple navy dress, the one William always said brought out my eyes. I put on his favorite necklace, the pearl one he'd given me for our 25th anniversary. Looking in the mirror, I could almost hear his voice telling me I looked beautiful. The party was at my house, which Jessica had insisted on because it would be more meaningful. When I arrived home from my morning walk, I found her directing caterers and arranging flowers. Everything looked elegant and sophisticated. Nothing like the casual gatherings William and I used to host. There you are, Jessica said when she saw me. Go get changed into something more festive. This dress is so somber. I looked down at my navy dress, confused. This is one of my favorites. Exactly the problem, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. The guests began arriving around 4. I recognized some faces, Christopher's colleagues from work, a few neighbors, Jessica's sister and her husband, but most were Jessica's friends, people I'd never met who looked at me with polite smiles and curious eyes. Everyone, this is Barbara, Jessica announced as if I were an exhibit at a museum. Christopher's mother, the birthday girl. The way she said birthday girl made me feel like a child being humored by adults. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself increasingly isolated in my own home. Conversations would die when I approached. People would nod politely at my stories about William or Christopher's childhood, then quickly change the subject to things I knew nothing about. vacation destinations, restaurants I couldn't afford, social events in circles I didn't belong to. Jessica was the perfect hostess, gliding between groups with champagne and appetizers, making sure everyone felt welcome, everyone except me. "Barbara, you're being so quiet," she announced during a lull in conversation, her voice carrying across the room. "Are you feeling all right? Sometimes grief can make people seem antisocial." Heat rose to my cheeks. "I'm fine, Jessica. Just listening." "Of course you are, honey. It must be hard being around so many people when you're used to being alone all the time." The room fell uncomfortably quiet. I could feel eyes on me, sympathetic but distant, like I was something to be pitied rather than celebrated. Christopher appeared beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "Mom, why don't you tell everyone about the garden you and Dad planted?" Before I could answer, Jessica laughed. "Oh, Christopher, nobody wants to hear about gardening. Let's keep things light and fun." The dismissal was swift and complete. Christopher's hand dropped from my shoulder. As the evening progressed, Jessica's comments became more pointed. She mentioned how worried she and Christopher were about me living alone. She shared concerns about my withdrawal from social activities and my reluctance to embrace new experiences. "It's so important for seniors to stay active and engaged," she told a group of her friends while I stood nearby. "Isolation can lead to all sorts of problems: cognitive decline, depression." Christopher and I are constantly researching options for her, options for me, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. The final blow came when Jessica gathered everyone for the cake cutting. She had chosen a small, elegant cake with "Happy Birthday" written in delicate script. As I stood behind it with the knife in my hand, she raised her wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, and the room quieted. "To Barbara on her 66th birthday. We're all here because we care about you, even though I know you feel like nobody does." My hand tightened on the knife handle. "Barbara, I know this year has been hard, losing William, feeling disconnected from the world, struggling with loneliness. But we want you to know that as long as Christopher and I are in charge of your well-being, you won't have to face these challenges alone." In charge of my well-being. The words echoed in my head like a warning bell. "Of course, we hope you'll start making better choices. Stop isolating yourself. Accept the help we're offering. Because honestly, Barbara, if you keep pushing people away, if you keep refusing to adapt to your new reality, then yes, if it's up to me, you'll die alone, abandoned, without your son." The room went dead silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, the same clock William and I had bought on our honeymoon. Jessica's words hung in the air like poison. Every person in that room had just witnessed her telling me, on my birthday, that I would die alone and abandoned, and not one person spoke up. Christopher was staring at his shoes. I set down the knife and looked at Jessica, really looked at her. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the satisfaction at having delivered such a public humiliation. She thought she had won something. I took a deep breath, feeling William's presence beside me as strongly as if he were still alive. "Jessica," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You have exactly 10 minutes to vanish from my house." Jessica laughed. It wasn't a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable laugh. It was the kind of laugh you hear from someone who thinks they've already won a game you didn't know you were playing. 10 minutes? She repeated, looking around the room at her audience. "Barbara, I think the grief is making you confused. This is your party. These are your guests. You can't just ask the hostess to leave." But something had shifted inside me when I spoke those words. For the first time in 6 months, I felt William's strength flowing through me instead of just his absence. 9 minutes and 30 seconds, I said calmly. Christopher finally looked up from his shoes. "Mom, what are you doing?" Jessica put a lot of effort into this party. I turned to face my son, this man I had raised alone after his father walked out when Christopher was 12. This boy I had worked double shifts to put through college, who I had supported through every heartbreak and triumph, who I had loved unconditionally for 35 years. "Christopher, your wife just told me, in front of all these people, that I will die alone and abandoned, and you said nothing." His face flushed red. She didn't mean it like that. How did she mean it then? Jessica stepped closer, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I had grown to despise. "Barbara, you're being dramatic. I was trying to motivate you to engage with life again. You've been wallowing in self-pity for months." Wallowing in self-pity. 6 months after losing the love of my life, I was wallowing in self-pity. 8 minutes, I said. That's when I noticed Mrs. Henderson from next door edging toward the front door. She caught my eye and mouthed, "Call me later," before slipping out. Smart woman. She had been married to her Henry for 38 years before losing him to a heart attack. She understood what I was going through in ways these people never would. Jessica was still talking, her voice getting sharper. "You know what your problem is, Barbara. You think the world owes you something because your husband died. Well, newsflash, people die every day. The rest of us don't get to stop living because of it." The cruelty of her words hit the remaining guests like a physical blow. I watched several of them exchange uncomfortable glances. Jessica's sister looked mortified. 7 minutes, I said. "This is ridiculous," Jessica snapped. "Christopher, tell your mother to stop this nonsense." But Christopher wasn't looking at either of us anymore. He was staring at the framed photo on the piano, the one of William and me on our wedding day. I had been just 24 then, radiant in my grandmother's lace dress. William was 26, handsome in his Navy uniform, his eyes full of love and promise for the future we would build together. For a moment, I thought maybe Christopher was remembering his stepfather. William had legally adopted him when we married, had been the only father Christopher really knew. William had taught him to drive, helped with homework, walked him down the aisle at his first wedding that ended in divorce 2 years later. But then Christopher turned back to me with that look, the one that said I was being unreasonable, that I needed to be managed and handled like a difficult child. "Mom, I think you should apologize to Jessica. She's been trying so hard to help you." The betrayal cut deeper than Jessica's cruelty ever could. My own son, asking me to apologize to the woman who had just publicly humiliated me on my birthday. 6 minutes, I said. Jessica's confidence was starting to crack around the edges. She looked around the room, perhaps finally noticing that her audience was no longer sympathetic. Her friends were studying their shoes. The neighbors who remained looked uncomfortable. Even the caterers had stopped what they were doing to watch this family drama unfold. "Fine," Jessica said, her voice tight. "If you want to throw a tantrum on your birthday, go ahead. But don't expect everyone to play along with your victim complex." Victim complex. Because grieving your husband of 42 years was now a victim complex. I walked to the kitchen, feeling everyone's eyes on me. My hands were steady as I reached for my purse and pulled out my phone. The number was still saved in my contacts from 3 weeks ago, when he had called about some paperwork. Robert Chen, William's lawyer, the man who had handled our wills, our business affairs, who had sat with us in his office just 8 months before William died to update some documents. 5 minutes, I called out to the living room as I dialed. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Chen and Associates. Robert, this is Barbara Miller. I need to ask you about those documents William left for me. The ones you said I should only open under specific circumstances." There was a pause. "Barbara, are you all right? It's Saturday evening. I'm fine, but I think the circumstances have arrived." Another pause, longer this time. "The sealed envelope? The one with the instructions?" "Yes." "Barbara, are you absolutely certain?" William was very specific about when those instructions should be followed. I looked through the kitchen doorway at Jessica, who was now pacing near the front window, checking her phone, probably texting complaints about my behavior to her friends. "Someone just told me that I will die alone and abandoned without my son, in my own home, at my own birthday party, in front of 20 witnesses. "I see." Robert's voice became very professional. "I can be there in 15 minutes with the documents." 4 minutes, I announced as I ended the call. Jessica spun around. 4 minutes until what, Barbara? What exactly do you think is going to happen?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of water, taking my time unscrewing the cap and taking a sip. The simple act of hydrating felt like the most natural thing in the world, while everything around me felt surreal. Christopher appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mom, who did you call?" "Robert Chen." "Dad's lawyer? Why?" "Because your father left me some instructions for exactly this situation." Christopher's brow furrowed. "What situation?" "The situation where someone tries to convince me that I'm a burden, that I should be grateful for being treated poorly, that I have no value except as a problem to be solved." "Mom, nobody said, your wife said I would die alone and abandoned. She said it in front of all these people. She said it on my birthday, in the house your stepfather and I shared for over 20 years. Christopher ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he had inherited from William. She's just frustrated because she's trying to help and you won't let her. Help me what, Christopher? Help me forget your stepfather? Help me give up my independence? Help me become someone I'm not, so she's more comfortable around me? 3 minutes, I announced. Most of the guests had quietly left by now. Jessica's friends had made polite excuses and slipped out the back door. Only a few people remained: Jessica's sister and her husband, Christopher's work colleague David, and Jessica herself, who was now standing in the middle of my living room, looking like a general whose army had just deserted. "This is insane," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Christopher, your mother is having some kind of breakdown." 2 minutes. That's when I heard the car door slam outside. Through the front window, I could see Robert Chen walking up my driveway carrying a leather briefcase. He was a small man in his 60s with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, but he moved with the purposeful stride of someone on official business. Jessica saw him too. "Who is that?" "William's lawyer," I said. 1 minute. The color drained from Jessica's face. "Why is William's lawyer here?" Christopher looked confused. "Mom, what's going on? Dad's been dead for 6 months. What could his lawyer possibly—" The doorbell rang. 30 seconds, I said. Jessica's eyes darted between me, the door, and Christopher. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely afraid. "Christopher," she whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Now." But Christopher was staring at me with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been respect. "Mom, what did Dad leave for you?" I walked to the front door and opened it. Robert Chen stood on my porch, his briefcase in one hand and a sealed manila envelope in the other. "Hello, Barbara," he said softly. "I brought the documents William left for you. Are you ready to hear what he wanted you to know?" I looked back at Jessica, who was now visibly trembling. "Time's up," I said. Robert Chen stepped into my living room with the careful dignity of a man who had delivered both good news and devastating news to families for over 30 years. He nodded politely to the remaining guests, but his attention was focused entirely on me. "Barbara, before we proceed, I need to confirm that the conditions William specified have been met." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a small notebook. "He was very specific about this." Jessica was backing toward the wall, her face pale. "What conditions? What are you talking about?" Robert ignored her and read from his notes. William wrote, "If Barbara is ever publicly humiliated by a family member or someone married into the family, particularly regarding her worth, her place in the family, or threats about dying alone, then the sealed instructions should be opened immediately." The silence in the room was deafening. Even Jessica seemed to realize that her exact words had somehow been anticipated by a man who had been dead for 6 months. Christopher sank into William's old armchair, the one I hadn't been able to bring myself to move. How could Dad have known? Robert's expression was gentle but sad. "Your father was a very observant man, Christopher. He saw patterns in human behavior that others missed. He spent his last months making sure Barbara would be protected. Protected from what?" Jessica's voice was shrill now. "I haven't done anything wrong. I've been trying to help her." "Help her?" Robert opened the manila envelope and pulled out several documents. "Is that what you call telling her she'll die alone and abandoned?" Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You don't understand. She's been impossible to deal with, refusing our help, isolating herself, making everything about her grief." "Please sit down, everyone," Robert said firmly. "This is going to take some time to explain." David, Christopher's colleague, cleared his throat. "Maybe I should leave. This seems like family business." "Actually," Robert said, consulting his notes again, "William specifically requested that witnesses be present for this. He wanted everything to be transparent and properly documented." Jessica grabbed Christopher's arm. "We don't have to listen to this. Let's just go home." But Christopher gently removed her hand from his arm. "No, Jessica. I want to hear what my stepfather left for Mom." Robert pulled out a chair from the dining room and positioned it facing the couch where Christopher and Jessica sat. I remained standing by the piano, next to that wedding photo of William and me, drawing strength from his memory. "William came to me 8 months before he died," Robert began. He was concerned about what might happen to Barbara after he was gone. Not financially. He had already taken care of that. But emotionally, socially, he was worried about how certain people might treat her in her grief. Certain people? Christopher asked. Robert looked directly at Jessica. He was specifically concerned about people who might see Barbara's grief as an opportunity to gain control over family decisions, financial matters, or Christopher's loyalty. Jessica shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. William barely knew me. We only met a few times before he got sick. Actually, Jessica, William knew you quite well. Robert pulled out a thick folder. He made it his business to know you, especially after Christopher told him about your engagement. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Robert opened the folder and spread several photographs across the coffee table. These were taken by a private investigator William hired. Jessica stared at the photos, her face going from pale to green. Christopher leaned forward to look and immediately recoiled. "What am I looking at?" Christopher whispered. The photographs showed Jessica in restaurants, at hotels, getting into cars with different men. The timestamps showed dates from when she was supposedly committed to Christopher, some from as recently as 2 months ago. Your fiancé, and later your wife, has been maintaining relationships with at least 3 other men since she started dating you, Robert said matter-of-factly. 2 of them are married. One of them is significantly wealthier than you are. Jessica was shaking now. Those photos could be anyone. They could be doctored. Robert pulled out another document. This is a credit report showing charges to hotels and restaurants that neither you nor Christopher paid for. Someone else has been financing Jessica's lifestyle, Christopher. Christopher stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Jessica, is this true? I can explain everything, she stammered. It's not what it looks like. It looks like you've been cheating on my son, I said quietly. It was the first time I had spoken since Robert arrived. Robert continued as if Jessica hadn't interrupted. William also had concerns about Jessica's treatment of you, Barbara. He asked me to document any incidents where she made you feel unwelcome or tried to push you out of Christopher's life. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. These are copies of text messages, recorded phone calls, and witness statements going back 10 months. Jessica's knees buckled and she collapsed back onto the couch. You can't record people without their consent. That's illegal. Actually, in this state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Barbara consented to recording conversations in her own home. Robert's voice was professionally neutral, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Christopher was flipping through pages of text messages. His face grew darker with each page. Jessica, you called my mother a pathetic old woman to your sister. You told your friends she was clinging to a dead man's memory and refusing to face reality. Those were private conversations, Jessica protested weakly. This one is particularly interesting, Robert said, pulling out another document. A text message you sent to Christopher 3 weeks ago, the same day you insisted on throwing this birthday party. You wrote, I'm going to make it clear to your mother that she needs to get with the program or get out of our lives. This party will be the perfect opportunity. My heart sank. The birthday party had been planned as an ambush. Jessica had invited all those people specifically to witness my humiliation. Christopher was staring at the document in his hands. You planned this? You planned to hurt my mother at her own birthday party? Christopher, you have to understand. She was never going to change on her own. Someone had to make her see reason. Reason? Christopher's voice was rising. What reason? That she should get over losing her husband of 42 years and 6 months. That she should pretend to be happy so you're more comfortable? Robert cleared his throat. There's more, I'm afraid. He pulled out a final document, this one in a sealed envelope marked, for Barbara only, to be opened when conditions are met. William wrote this letter specifically for you, Barbara. He wanted you to read it aloud, in front of witnesses, when someone finally showed their true colors. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Inside was a letter in William's careful handwriting, the same script that had written me love notes for over 4 decades. My dearest Barbara, I began, my voice catching on the familiar endearment. If you are reading this letter, it means someone has tried to make you feel small, worthless, or alone. I am so sorry I'm not there to protect you from this pain, but I hope these documents will do what I cannot. I paused, looking at Jessica, who was crying now, not tears of remorse, but tears of panic. I need you to know that you are not alone. You are not a burden, and you will never be abandoned as long as there are people in this world who understand true love and loyalty. The person who has hurt you today has revealed their character, and now they must face the consequences of that revelation. Christopher was staring at me, tears in his eyes. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. There's more, I said, looking back at the letter. Barbara, I have left specific instructions with Robert about our assets and how they should be distributed. I originally planned to leave Jessica a substantial inheritance as Christopher's wife. However, if she has revealed herself to be cruel or manipulative toward you, those provisions are to be revoked immediately. Jessica stopped crying. What provisions? Robert answered her. William left you $200,000 in his original will. He also put aside money for future grandchildren's college funds, with you and Christopher as trustees. All of that is contingent on your treatment of Barbara. How much money are we talking about? Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Including the college funds and other provisions, approximately $500,000 that was designated for your family. The number hit Jessica like a physical blow. $500,000 that she had just lost with her cruel words. But more than that, Robert continued, William left the house to Barbara with a specific provision. If anyone tries to convince her to sell it or move out of it, they forfeit any claim to the property when she passes away. Jessica looked around my living room with new eyes. This wasn't just my home anymore. It was $500,000 in real estate that would never belong to her family now. William suspected, Robert said, consulting the letter again, that if someone was cruel enough to attack Barbara's grief, they were probably also dishonest in other ways. He was right. The photographs of Jessica with other men seemed to glow on the coffee table like evidence at a trial. Christopher stood up slowly, looking at his wife with disgust. How long, Jessica? How long have you been planning to get rid of my mother and take her money? It's not like that, she whispered, but the fight had gone out of her. Then what is it like? He demanded. Robert closed his briefcase with a decisive snap. Barbara, everything is now legally documented. Jessica has no claim to any of William's estate, and her behavior tonight has been witnessed and recorded. You're protected. I folded William's letter carefully and held it against my chest. Even from beyond the grave, my husband was still taking care of me, still fighting for me, still loving me. Jessica looked up at me with desperate eyes. Barbara, please, we can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll do better. I met her gaze steadily. Your 10 minutes were up 20 minutes ago, Jessica. It's time for you to leave my house. Jessica didn't move. She sat on my couch, staring at the photographs scattered across the coffee table like the remnants of her carefully constructed life. Her perfectly applied makeup was streaked with tears, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked her actual age. Please, she whispered, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear her. You don't understand what my life was like before Christopher. I grew up with nothing. Nothing. Christopher was standing by the window now, his back to all of us, his shoulders rigid with betrayal and rage. So you decided to take everything from someone else? I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Jessica looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Genuine desperation. Not the calculated manipulation she'd used for months, but raw, terrified panic. I thought William would die and leave everything to Christopher. I thought if I could just get you to move into one of those senior communities, we could sell this house and have enough money to really start our lives together. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Christopher turned around slowly. You were planning to get rid of my mother before my stepfather even died? Jessica's hands were shaking as she reached for one of the photographs. It showed her kissing a man I didn't recognize outside an expensive restaurant. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 weeks after William's funeral. This one, she said, pointing at the photo. He's a real estate developer. He told me this house could be worth $800,000 if we renovated it, but only if we could get Barbara to sell. My blood turned cold. She hadn't just planned to push me out of Christopher's life. She'd planned to push me out of my home. The home William and I had built together, where every room held 40 years of memories. Robert Chen was taking notes in his small notebook, documenting every word. Jessica, I need to ask you directly. Did you marry Christopher primarily for financial gain? No, she said quickly, then caught herself. Not primarily. I did love him. I do love him. But Robert prompted. Jessica glanced at Christopher, who was watching her with the expression of someone seeing a stranger. But when I found out about William's money, about this house, about the life they lived, it made everything easier. I thought I could have love and security. At my mother's expense, Christopher said flatly. She was supposed to adjust, Jessica said, her voice gaining a hint of its old defensiveness. She was supposed to move on. Normal widows don't cling to their dead husband's memory for months. The cruelty of her words hit me like a slap. 6 months of grief was too long for Jessica's comfort. Robert looked up from his notes. Jessica, did you research William's financial situation before you married Christopher? She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally answered, her voice was barely audible. My sister's husband works at the bank. He told me about the accounts, the investments. He said William was worth almost $2 million. Christopher made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. You investigated my stepfather's finances before you married me? I wanted to know what kind of family I was marrying into. You wanted to know how much money there was, Christopher corrected, his voice bitter. Robert pulled out another document from his briefcase. This is particularly interesting, Jessica. William suspected you might have inside information about his finances, so he moved most of his assets to different banks 3 months before he died. The accounts your brother-in-law told you about? They contained less than $10,000 by the time William passed away. Jessica's face went white. What? The real money, the investments, the life insurance policies, they were all moved to institutions where your family had no access to information. William was protecting his assets from exactly this kind of situation. I watched Jessica process this information, watched her realize that she had based her entire plan on outdated financial intelligence. Where is the money now? She asked, though I could see she already dreaded the answer. In a trust for Barbara's care and comfort for the rest of her life. After she passes, it goes to legitimate charities and to Christopher, provided he has shown proper respect for his mother's memory. Christopher turned to stare at me. Mom, did you know about this? I shook my head. William handled our finances. He told me I'd be taken care of, but I had no idea about the specifics. Robert smiled gently at me. William wanted to make sure you never had to worry about money, but he also wanted to make sure no one could manipulate you because of money. Jessica stood up abruptly, swaying slightly as if the blood had rushed from her head. This is all wrong. This isn't how it was supposed to happen. How was it supposed to happen? Christopher asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Jessica began pacing, her hands fluttering around her face like she was trying to catch thoughts that kept escaping. We were supposed to be happy. You and me and Barbara in some nice senior place where she could make friends her own age. We were supposed to travel and renovate this house and maybe have babies. Babies, Christopher repeated. Were you planning to get pregnant to secure your position? Jessica stopped pacing. The look on her face was answer enough. Oh my God, Christopher whispered. You had it all planned out. Robert consulted his notes again. Actually, Christopher, according to William's instructions, there's something else you need to know. He pulled out a small digital recorder and placed it on the coffee table. William asked me to play this if Jessica ever revealed her true intentions. He pressed play, and William's voice filled the room. Hearing my husband's voice again, so clear and strong, brought tears to my eyes. Christopher, if you're hearing this recording, it means Jessica has shown her true character. I need you to know that I loved you like my own son from the day I married your mother. You brought joy to our lives, and watching you grow into a good man was one of my greatest privileges. Christopher was crying now, quiet tears that he wiped away with the back of his hand. But son, I also need you to know that the woman you married saw you as a stepping stone to a comfortable life, not as a partner to build a life with. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I hoped I was wrong about her, but I couldn't risk your mother's security and happiness on that hope. Jessica was backing toward the front door now, as if she could escape William's words by running away. Jessica, if you're listening to this, I want you to understand something. Barbara is the strongest woman I ever knew. She raised a wonderful son by herself. She supported our family through difficult times, and she loved me completely for over 4 decades. She deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, especially in her grief. If you couldn't find it in your heart to treat her well, then you never deserve to be part of our family. The recording continued. Christopher, your mother doesn't need to be managed or fixed or handled. She needs to be loved. If Jessica couldn't love her, then Jessica doesn't understand what love really means. Jessica reached for the door handle, but Christopher's voice stopped her. Don't. She turned around, hope flickering in her eyes. Don't leave yet, Christopher continued. I want to hear the rest of what my father has to say. William's voice continued from the recorder. I've left instructions with Robert about the financial arrangements, but more importantly, I've left instructions about protecting Barbara from anyone who would try to diminish her or push her aside. She may be grieving, but she is not weak. She may be adjusting to life without me, but she is not helpless. Anyone who treats her as less than the remarkable woman she is doesn't deserve the privilege of knowing her. I pressed my hand to my heart, feeling William's love surrounding me even in death. And Christopher, if you're having to choose between your mother and your wife, remember this. Your mother loved you when you had nothing to offer but potential. She supported you when you needed help. She celebrated your successes without jealousy. Real love doesn't ask you to choose. Real love embraces the people you love. The recording ended, leaving the room in heavy silence. Jessica was sobbing now, not the delicate tears she'd shed earlier, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. Christopher, please, we can fix this. I'll apologize to Barbara. I'll go to counseling. I'll do whatever you want. Our Christopher looked at his wife with something like pity. Jessica, you told my mother she would die alone and abandoned. You planned to push her out of her own home. You cheated on me with multiple men. You married me for money that you thought you could access through my stepfather's death. He paused, running his hand through his hair again. What exactly do you think we can fix? I can change, she whispered. Into what? Into someone who isn't you? Robert cleared his throat. Christopher, there are some legal documents you need to sign regarding the dissolution of Jessica's claims to the estate. Given tonight's revelations, William's conditions have been met. Jessica looked around the room desperately, like a trapped animal searching for escape. Her gaze landed on me, standing beside William's piano, still holding his letter. Barbara, she said, her voice cracking, you have all the power now. You can forgive me. You can tell them to give me another chance. I looked at this woman who had spent months trying to erase me from my own family, who had planned my humiliation, who had seen my grief as an opportunity to steal my home and my son's love. Jessica, I said quietly, 8 minutes ago, you were crying and begging for forgiveness. But even now, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. A woman who truly loved my son would never have hurt the person who gave him life. A woman who understood real love would have supported me through my grief, not used it against me. You've shown me exactly who you are, Jessica. And who you are is someone who should never have been part of this family. Christopher walked to the front door and opened it wide. Your 10 minutes ended a long time ago, he said quietly. It's time for you to go. Jessica stood in my doorway for a long moment, looking back at the ruins of her carefully constructed plan. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup completely destroyed by tears, and her hands were shaking as she clutched her purse. This isn't over, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice anymore. I have rights. I'm his wife. Robert Chen looked up from the legal documents he was organizing. Actually, Jessica, given the evidence of adultery and the documentation of your treatment of Barbara, Christopher has grounds for an annulment rather than a divorce. Legally, it would be as if the marriage never happened. The words hit her like a physical blow. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. Annulment, she whispered. Christopher stepped closer to the door, his face hard with resolve. You married me under false pretenses, Jessica. You pretended to love me while planning to steal from my family. That's fraud. I do love you, she said desperately. Christopher, please. Think about what we had together. Think about our plans for the future. You mean your plans, Christopher corrected. Your plans to isolate my mother, sell her house, and spend my stepfather's money. I was just the means to an end. Jessica's composure cracked completely then. She sank against the door frame, sliding down until she was sitting on my front porch sobbing. You don't understand what it was like growing up poor, she cried, wearing secondhand clothes to school, having the electricity turned off because we couldn't pay the bill, watching my mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. I swore I would never live like that again. I found myself walking toward the door, drawn by something in her voice. For the first time since I'd known Jessica, she sounded genuinely human rather than calculating. So, you decided to build your security on someone else's suffering? I asked quietly. She looked up at me through her tears. I thought you had enough. This house, William's insurance money, Christopher's love, I thought sharing some of that wouldn't hurt you. Sharing? Christopher's voice was incredulous. You weren't planning to share anything, Jessica. You were planning to take it all. Robert cleared his throat. There's something else we need to discuss. Jessica, your treatment of Barbara tonight was witnessed by several people. Given that this was premeditated, as shown by your text messages, Barbara has grounds to pursue harassment charges if she chooses. Jessica's face went white. Harassment charges? Elder abuse specifically, Robert continued. Deliberately causing emotional distress to someone over 65 through systematic intimidation and humiliation. It's a felony in this state. I watched Jessica absorb this information, watched her realize that her actions tonight could result in more than just losing money and a marriage. They could result in a criminal record. Barbara, she whispered, looking up at me with desperate eyes. Please don't press charges. I'll leave town. I'll never bother you again. I'll sign whatever papers Christopher wants for the annulment. Just please don't destroy my life. Christopher made a sound of disgust. Your life? What about what you tried to do to my mother's life? But I found myself studying Jessica's face, seeing past the makeup and manipulation to the frightened woman underneath. I thought about William's letter, about his words of love and protection, about the strength he'd tried to give me even from beyond the grave. Jessica, I said finally, stand up. She struggled to her feet, wiping her nose with the back of her hand like a child. Look at me, I said. She met my eyes reluctantly. I'm not going to press charges, I said, and I heard Christopher start to protest behind me. But not because I forgive you. I'm not pressing charges because I don't want to spend the next months or years having you be part of my life in any way. Relief flooded Jessica's face. But, I continued, you're going to do exactly what you just promised. You're going to leave town. You're going to sign the annulment papers. And you're going to return every gift Christopher ever gave you, every piece of jewelry, every expensive item you purchased with his money or that you claimed was paid for by your mysterious other boyfriends. Jessica nodded frantically. Yes, anything. I'll do anything. Robert pulled out a document from his briefcase. I took the liberty of preparing this agreement based on William's instructions. Jessica, if you sign this, you relinquish all claims to any assets belonging to Christopher, Barbara, or William's estate. You agree to leave the state within 30 days. And you agree never to contact any member of this family again. He handed her a pen. Jessica read through the document quickly, her hand shaking. What if I don't sign? She asked. Then we proceed with criminal charges, a contested divorce instead of an annulment, and a very public trial where all of this evidence becomes part of the public record, Robert said matter-of-factly. Jessica signed the document without another word. David, Christopher's colleague who had remained quietly in the corner throughout this entire ordeal, finally spoke up. I should probably mention that I recorded most of this evening on my phone. Jessica, if you ever try to come back or cause problems for this family, that recording will be sent to every employer, every dating app, and every social media platform you ever try to use. Jessica stared at him in shock. You recorded this? William asked me to, David said simply. He contacted me months ago, said he was worried about what might happen to Barbara after he died. He asked me to be here tonight, to document whatever happened. The final pieces of William's plan fell into place. He hadn't just left legal documents and financial protections. He'd arranged for witnesses, for recordings, for a complete documentation of Jessica's character. Even in death, my husband had outmaneuvered a woman who thought she could manipulate her way into our family's wealth. Christopher walked over to Jessica and held out his hand. Your wedding ring. She looked down at the diamond ring on her finger, the ring that had cost Christopher 3 months' salary. The ring she'd worn while kissing other men in those photographs. Slowly, she slid it off her finger and placed it in Christopher's palm. My grandmother's necklace, he said next. Jessica reached behind her neck and unclasped the antique pearl necklace that had belonged to Christopher's paternal grandmother, the grandmother who had raised him after his father left. One by one, Christopher reclaimed every gift he'd given her: the earrings from their first anniversary, the bracelet from her birthday, the watch from Christmas. With each item she returned, Jessica seemed to shrink smaller, until she looked like what she truly was: a woman who had built her identity entirely on things that didn't belong to her. "There's one more thing," Robert said, pulling out a final document. "Jessica, this is a restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of Barbara or Christopher, or if you attempt to contact them through any means, you will be arrested immediately." Jessica took the paper with numb fingers. "I need my clothes from Christopher's apartment," she said quietly. "They'll be packed and delivered to whatever address you provide," Christopher said. "But you don't get to go back there. You don't get to be in any space that's mine ever again." Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face again. But these weren't the calculated tears she'd used to manipulate situations before. These were the tears of someone who had gambled everything and lost. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me one more time. "Barbara," she said, her voice barely audible. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but sorry I became the kind of person who could hurt someone the way I hurt you." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had tried to steal my home, my son, and my dignity. "Jessica," I said finally, "I hope you find whatever it is you're really looking for, but I hope you find it without hurting anyone else." She walked down my front steps and got into her car. We all stood in the doorway watching as she drove away, her taillights disappearing around the corner. Christopher closed the door and leaned against it, looking exhausted. "Is it really over?" he asked. Robert was packing his briefcase, organizing the signed documents with professional efficiency. "It's over. The annulment papers will be filed first thing Monday morning. The restraining order is already in effect. And Barbara, all of William's protections are now legally in place." Christopher walked over to me and wrapped his arms around me in a hug that reminded me of when he was a little boy seeking comfort after a nightmare. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered against my hair. "I should have protected you. I should have seen what she was doing." I held my son close, feeling his shoulders shake with guilt and grief. "You couldn't have known," I said softly. "She was very good at hiding what she really was." "But Dad knew," Christopher said, pulling back to look at me. "Even sick, even dying, he was still taking care of both of us." I smiled through my tears, thinking of William's letter, still folded in my pocket. "Your stepfather always said that love meant protecting the people you care about, even when you can't be there to do it in person." Robert finished packing his briefcase and headed toward the door. "Barbara, I'll call you next week to go over the financial arrangements. William left very detailed instructions about how he wanted you to be cared for." After he left, Christopher and I stood in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a birthday party. The cake still sat on the dining room table, untouched. The flowers Jessica had arranged were still perfect in their vases. "What happens now?" Christopher asked. I walked over to the piano and picked up the photograph of William and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so hopeful, so certain that love could conquer anything. "Now," I said, "we figure out how to be a family again, the right way this time." Christopher smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. "I'd like that, Mom. I'd really like that." As we began cleaning up the abandoned party, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the absence of grief, but the presence of hope. William was gone, but his love remained, stronger than any manipulation, more lasting than any scheme. Jessica had tried to destroy our family, but instead, she had revealed its true strength, and that strength would carry us forward, together, just as William had always intended. 3 months later, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunrise when Christopher's car pulled into the driveway. It was our Saturday morning tradition now: coffee on the porch, working in the garden together, and the comfortable silence that comes when a family has found its way back to itself. He climbed the steps carrying 2 cups of coffee and a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, accepting the coffee and eyeing the gift suspiciously. "It's not your birthday," he said with a smile, settling into William's old rocking chair beside me. "But I saw it and thought of you." Inside the wrapping was a small silver frame containing a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed William and me dancing at Christopher's college graduation party, both of us laughing at something off camera. I was wearing a blue dress that brought out my eyes, and William's arms were wrapped around me like I was the most precious thing in the world. "Where did you find this?" I whispered, tracing William's face with my finger. "David took it. He gave me copies of all the photos from that day when I asked him. I thought you'd like to have it." I held the frame against my chest, feeling that familiar ache of missing William mixed with gratitude for having loved him. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it no longer felt like drowning. Now it felt like carrying something beautiful that made me stronger. "How are you doing, really?" Christopher asked, studying my face the way he used to when he was little and trying to figure out if I was upset about something. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. Different than I was before, but good. The past 3 months had brought changes I never could have expected. The financial security William had arranged meant I could finally breathe without counting every dollar. I'd hired a housekeeper to help with the deep cleaning, not because I couldn't do it myself, but because I no longer wanted to spend my energy on tasks that kept me from living. I'd started volunteering at the local library, reading to children during story time. Their innocent joy reminded me that happiness still existed in the world, even when grief tried to convince me otherwise. I'd also joined a grief support group, not because Jessica had been right about my needing help, but because I'd finally understood that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to carry love forward instead of letting loss drag me backward. "I have some news," Christopher said, interrupting my thoughts. "Good news or complicated news?" "Both, maybe." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. "I got a call from Jessica's sister yesterday." My stomach tightened. "What did she want?" "To apologize, mostly. And to let me know that Jessica is in therapy. Real therapy this time, not the kind where you just complain about everyone else." I rocked slowly in my chair, processing this information. "How do you feel about that?" Christopher was quiet for a moment, watching a cardinal build its nest in the oak tree at the edge of my yard. "I feel like it's good for her, but it doesn't change anything for us. She hurt you, Mom. She tried to destroy our relationship. Therapy doesn't undo that." "No," I agreed, "but maybe it prevents her from doing it to someone else." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood come to life. Mrs. Henderson waved from her garden next door. The Johnsons' dog barked at a squirrel. Normal, peaceful sounds that I'd learned to appreciate again. "There's something else," Christopher said. "I've been thinking about dating again." I turned to look at him, surprised. "Already?" "Not already," he said quickly. "I know it's only been 3 months since the annulment was finalized. But I met someone at that grief support group you recommended. Her name is Sarah, and she lost her husband 2 years ago. She has a 10-year-old daughter." The thought of Christopher with another woman should have made me nervous after what we'd been through with Jessica. But something in his voice, a gentleness I hadn't heard in years, made me curious instead of worried. "Tell me about her." Christopher's face softened in a way that reminded me of the boy who used to tell me about his crushes in high school. "She's a teacher. Elementary school, 3rd grade. Her husband died in a car accident, and she's been raising Emma, that's her daughter, by herself ever since." "Emma," I repeated. "That's a lovely name. She's smart and funny and patient with Emma's questions about why some kids have daddies and she doesn't." "And Sarah." He paused, searching for words. "Sarah understands that loving someone means loving the people they love. When I told her about you, about what happened with Jessica, she asked when she could meet you." Tears pricked my eyes. After months of being seen as an obstacle to my son's happiness, the idea of a woman who wanted to meet me felt like a miracle. "She sounds wonderful," I said. "I want you to meet them both, but only when you're ready. There's no rush, no pressure. I just wanted you to know that I'm learning to trust my judgment again, and part of that means choosing people who see you the way I see you, as someone worth knowing and loving." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "I'd like to meet them whenever you think the time is right." Christopher smiled. "Maybe next week? I thought I could invite them for Sunday dinner." Sarah's been teaching Emma to cook, and Emma specifically asked if she could help make dessert for the lady who raised such a nice man. "She said that?" 10-year-olds don't lie about things like that. They're too honest. I laughed, imagining this little girl I'd never met standing in my kitchen, helping me bake cookies or a cake. The thought of children in my house again, of laughter echoing through these rooms, filled me with a warmth I'd thought I'd lost forever. I have something to show you too, I said, standing up from my rocking chair. Wait here. I went inside and returned with a letter I'd received the previous week. Christopher recognized the law firm's letterhead immediately. What's this about? Read it, I said. Christopher opened the envelope and read aloud. Dear Mrs. Miller, as executor of your late husband's estate, I am pleased to inform you that the final provisions of his will have been implemented. The William Miller Foundation for Family Support has been established with an initial funding of $500,000 to be administered according to your wishes and his specifications. Christopher looked up at me, confused. A foundation? I nodded. William left instructions for creating a foundation to help families dealing with loss and manipulation. He wanted to make sure other widows wouldn't go through what he was afraid I might face. That's incredible, Mom. The foundation will provide legal support, counseling services, and financial assistance to people whose families are being torn apart by greed or manipulation. It's going to help people like me, but also people like Jessica, people who need help before they make choices that destroy their lives. Christopher folded the letter carefully. He really thought of everything, didn't he? Your stepfather always said that the best way to honor love was to protect it in others. We rocked in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The morning was warming up, promising a beautiful day. I keep thinking about something Jessica said that night, Christopher finally admitted. About growing up poor, about being afraid of living like that again. What about it? I understand the fear, but I don't understand the solution she chose. When I was scared about money, you taught me to work harder. To be honest, to build something worth having. She chose to take from others instead. I nodded. Fear can make people do terrible things if they don't have better examples to follow. Did Dad leave instructions about helping people like Jessica too? I smiled, pulling William's final letter from my pocket. I'd been carrying it with me for 3 months now, reading it whenever I needed to remember his wisdom. Actually, he did. He set aside money specifically for counseling and rehabilitation programs for people who've hurt their families through greed or manipulation. He said broken people often break others, but they can be fixed if someone cares enough to try. Christopher shook his head in amazement. Even after what she tried to do to you, he wanted to help her? Your stepfather understood that protecting people sometimes means helping their attackers become better people. The foundation will offer both services, protection for victims and rehabilitation for those who harm others. A car pulled into the driveway, and we both looked up to see Mrs. Henderson walking over with a covered dish. I made too much casserole again, she called out, though we both knew she made extra on purpose. Thought you might like some for lunch. Mrs. Henderson had become a regular presence in my life since that horrible birthday party. She'd experienced her own version of family manipulation after her husband died, and we'd found comfort in sharing our stories and our solutions. Stay for coffee, I offered, and she settled into the third rocking chair that Christopher had added to my porch the week before. How's the foundation planning coming along? She asked. Mrs. Henderson was going to be one of the first board members, bringing her experience with senior advocacy groups. We should be able to start accepting applications next month, I said. Robert thinks we'll help at least 50 families in the first year, and hopefully prevent 50 more from going through what we did, Mrs. Henderson added. As the three of us sat on my porch, planning ways to help other families heal and protect themselves, I felt William's presence more strongly than I had since the night he died. Not the crushing weight of his absence, but the continuing warmth of his love. The foundation wasn't just about money or legal protection. It was about teaching people that they deserve to be treated with kindness, that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, and that families are strongest when they protect their most vulnerable members. Jessica had tried to convince me that I was a burden, that my grief was inconvenient, that my place in Christopher's life was negotiable. She'd been wrong about all of it, but I understood now that she'd been wrong because no one had ever taught her better. The foundation would teach people better. It would show them that love multiplies when you give it away, that strength comes from lifting others up, and that the best way to honor those we've lost is to protect those who remain. Christopher stood up to walk Mrs. Henderson home with her empty casserole dish, but before he left, he kissed my forehead the way William used to. "I love you, Mom. Thanks for teaching me what that really means." After they left, I sat alone on my porch with William's letter in my hands and his photograph beside me. The house behind me was quiet, but not empty. It was full of memories, plans, and possibilities. Tomorrow, I would meet with the Foundation's lawyer to finalize the applications process. Next week, I would meet Sarah and Emma, and maybe begin to understand how families grow and change without losing their essential love. But today, I was exactly where I belonged. In the home I'd shared with William, protected by his love, surrounded by the family that love had created, and ready to share that love with others who needed it. Jessica had been wrong about everything, but especially about this. I would not die alone and abandoned. I would live surrounded by love, the love I'd received, the love I'd given, and the love I would continue to share for as long as I drew breath. That was William's final gift to me, not just protection from those who would harm me, but the knowledge that love, real love, never truly ends. It just finds new ways to flourish.